Welcome to 1 Week Critiques, the interview series, number 22. I'm al-Sirgany. Today I'm here with Valerie Vogrin, professor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, one of my own too many alma maters, and the author of Shebang, a phenomenal novel of some years ago, and her latest book, The Things We'll Need for the Coming Difficulties. Welcome, Valerie.
Hi, Adam. I'm glad to be here. Good to see you.
So full disclosure, Valerie is one of my former professors and one of my favorite people on earth. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you in today, is so that we could talk about not only an individual story of yours, like we always talk about, but so we can talk about how stories get anthologized and edited more specifically. I've had the pleasure of working with you on doing journal work, and I think of you as someone who's phenomenal at seeing what's best in a story and bringing it out, not only by the way that you shape it, but by the way that you put it in a collection. So I'm hoping that we can cover some of that as we talk about Conversations with My Landlord Jory, which was the original title of what in your book is called The Dotted Line. Would you mind starting the conversation by summarizing the story a little bit? Because it is, I think, relevant to how you edit it, but also because I don't know that any given section will give the whole flavor of what's happening.
Yes, sure. The narrator of the story is been living in a rented space with a woman who she knows through her mother, right? And she has gotten a pretty good deal, but the Jory, the landlord, is encroaching. She would like to be a friend. She would also like to continue the lease, to continue this arrangement. And so it's really, it is a kind of a classic story structure, right? Where the, a character has a decision, the clock is ticking, they need to make a, thing, and she's torn between the sort of promise that she made to her mother, who's now dead, and, like maybe her sanity. But yeah, so, and at the end, she makes her choice. Yeah.
Cool. So can we dive in a little bit by taking a brief look at the original draft of the story, Conversations with My Landlord Jory?
Sure. Your cheeks look funny. You're not pregnant, are you? I'm fond of shadows, aren't you? I really should move, I thought, nearly every time we spoke. It wasn't as if moving would be a protracted ordeal. I had so few things I wouldn't even need to label my boxes. Yet I couldn't summon any real energy around the idea. The savory aroma of Jory's ever simmering vegetable broth made me feel lethargic. Although the second I had that thought, the crazy broth thought, I realized it was something she would say, which made me want to run screaming into the street. Yet my flat in Jory's small house was nicer than the average apartment, and I paid lower than average rent, and she allowed pets. My credit sucked, and I lived more or less paycheck to paycheck, making my student loan payments and falling further and further behind on the credit card bills that had eventually found their way back to me. Jory hadn't checked my credit and had let me move in without a deposit. I'd stayed for 2 years, and she expected more. You've been such a loyal tenant, Jory said, daring me to contradict.
I love that introduction. It's got a good bit of your very Vogrin wit, and I think it sets up the characters really well. So I think of this story, as well as the whole of Things We'll Need for the Coming Difficulties, as being a little bit about individual moments that characters are having, as those moments are set up against these, I think what I called them when I was emailing you, is the sort of stolid facts of their lives, which are everything from being able to rent an apartment and having a place to live, which comes up repeatedly throughout the book, to professional difficulties and challenges. There's one of my favorite stories is about Lonesome George's girlfriend, the last of a particular Galapagos tortoise species. And there's also these other sets of things that are going on. People are sort of constantly dying or near dying in the book, or having divorces in the book, or critical elements. And so I've got two questions that sort of come off of that conflict of the momentary thing that's happening set against the big backdrop. One being, what is it that appeals to you about those moments? And two, how have the specific kinds of moments you've chosen helped you establish an order for the book and set out how the book is anthologized?
Okay. Well, it's funny. I mean, the stories were in this collection were probably written over, as is often the case when it, maybe written over maybe 20 years, maybe 15. But the idea is that, I was working on novels, I was working on other things. And then as I kept thinking I had a collection and then it wasn't quite right, and so I would take something out and put something in. So that really was a process. And so some of the stories, when I originally conceived of them, I probably read them in a slightly different way. I mean, as you say, my characters, I feel, are often bemused to say it, like, to kind of put it in the best frame, and often just sort of baffled and disturbed, right, by their circumstances. But I think that what I see, like, now looking back, and I think certainly this year has brought that to all of us,
Yeah.
is how little control we actually have. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, I think I think it was Rebecca Solnit who said it was sort of like a crash course in Buddhism, like the idea, like, oh yeah, you just have to let go because you don't control it. But I feel like my characters and my former self were always like really railing against like circumstances, feeling like they had more control. And so they would come up against the things that would be like, you don't actually, you end up really getting kind of carried away on the flow of things or on other people's desires. I mean, for children, their parents have undue control over them. And in the story the girlfriend story, the scientist, something that happened, an experience she had when she was a grad student, in a foreign country, like ends up having this shadow over her career. And so she doesn't even have control over her own narrative, so I am really drawn to those situations. I think I do concentrate, in short stories in particular. I mean, I feel like it is a form of moments. Um, and so I think that in terms of putting this collection together, then that the stories, I tried to choose stories that really used a multiple, like a variety of strategies for like kind of thinking about that, so that there's, that the first story in the collection is the next thing, a story with chorus, in which there's literally kind of a Greek chorus commenting on the action, or stories like the girlfriend, which kind of have multiple sections with different kinds of voices, and then stories that have multiple point of view characters, and just trying to kind of get at that from different angles, I guess, so that it didn't become tedious, like just this idea of this character kind of just looking around going, what the hell, like, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if I can keep digging into that thought about sort of what you're trying to put into the book, one thing I think you hit on a lot is something that I'm thinking of is obligatory love, um, by which I mean that there are a lot of characters in your book who um, are, like it or not, somehow tied to an ex, or one individual who got married a little too fast and is learning about her husband through his
It's
sisters, and um, also parents and siblings play a pretty intense role. There's a character who has a sister who went missing, and that shadow kind of hangs over the family, or um, so on and so forth. I'm not going to list every example in the book of that, and some of that's also bound up, including in this story, with the fact that some promises are made, or some of those obligations aren't just about family or connection or marriage or the longevity of a relationship, but are about the life circumstances of the person in front of you. A lot of people, this story involves two mothers who have had breast cancer, and that being part of the connection point. And I'm wondering if that for you is an intentional connection point, or if it's something that you've just, over that 15 or 20 years, has become something that you're fascinated with, and so you're coming back to, if you built that into the story or the set of stories. as glue, or?
Yeah, I think it's probably comes out more of, well, maybe a desire to just look at, well, I mean, if I feel like in some ways a fiction writing is all an exploration of like why it's so hard to be a human. Why is it so hard, to have relationships? Why is it so hard to do the things, to get out of our own way and do the, pursue the dreams that we have, or just to behave well? And so I am, because I mean, so I like looking at sometimes those less maybe examined relationships. I mean, so that there aren't, I mean, except for the maybe last story, which is still kind of an unconventional love story, but it is a love story. But I mean, I try to kind of look at, even when it's a relationship story, to look at it aslant and look instead at those other relationships that are, and which was why I was really drawn to the idea of like the landlord, tenant relationship, because it's so sort of intimate and profound. This person has the ability to enter your space,
Yeah.
and you really have very little recourse over that. And yet, on the other hand, you have the ability to just walk out, I suppose, but you may not. I mean, back, in real life. And so, and like with sister-in-laws or with, parents, I mean, I am interested in that. I mean, some of that is just like biographical or autobiographical, right? I mean, that, where, I mean, that probably, maybe the story of the sisters-in-law, I'm trying to think, is that the most autobiographical? It's hard, like, now I'd have to go back through all of them. But, like I had a time when, I was on a vacation with sisters-in-law. And I think there was, wait, 3 sisters. I can't now remember how many, there's 4 maybe. But like I was really blown away by that, because like the big familyness of it, and how they had a sense of themselves, and then I was the outsider, and it was fraught. In fact, at one point, one of my actual sisters-in-law like left, like, and just sort of like in relationship to something that she like kind of put it on me, and I was like horrified. So I mean, it left this emotional scar. Like I think I was working that out. But yeah, so, but again, I don't know that I've read a story about like relationships. I mean, not that no one's ever done it, but it's not the more common thing, like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's it. More just looking at things aslant and seeing those relationships that actually matter quite a bit, but aren't the ones that you would look back at the end of your life and go, oh yeah, when so-and-so was my landlord, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, I think that's really phenomenal. It's made me think about, among other things, right? Like, not just relationships I've had, but relationships through the kinds of people that relationships bring into your life. But also, um, you've helped me realize that many of my landlords are phenomenal fodder for narrative that I haven't um, thought about dragging in. To that end, one of the things that you mentioned to me was that you'd actually considered at one point doing a set of stories that was all conversations with my landlord. And there is a story in the final version of Things We'll Need for the Coming Difficulties that is called Conversations with My Landlord, where a young knitter has her hand damaged and has a difficult romantic relationship with her landlord. But I wondered if you could talk about that title and the choice to move away from that kind of larger concept album, and also why some of that stayed and this story has become the dotted line,
Right.
rather than Conversations with My Landlord Jory.
Well, I think part of it has to do with that. Now that I have my head about me a little bit, my wits about me, Conversations with My Landlord would have been like the first chronologically of drafting these stories, would have been the first one that I wrote. So it's the oldest story originally, and it is autobiographical in the sense that I did, shortly after moving into this apartment, have like the tip of my finger, guillotined by a broken window. And I did have a very profound experience with this hand surgeon who spent hours just reconstructing this fingernail bed so I'd still have a fingernail, and I can share with your viewers later the fingers, but it doesn't need to happen. But I think, but again, like in that story, I was really interested in the other inhabitants of the building too, in the sense of the building being a place where other stories could take place. So I still think it's like an idea that could happen, like a collection of stories around that. Of course, at that time too, I had always thought like I would say things that were really actually like stupidly privileged things to say, which were like, I come from a long line of renters, you know, like, and like, because my grandparents lived in, you know, in like Chicago, and people, you know, like white working class people didn't own, you know, at least in that generation, like depression and stuff like that. But I wasn't thinking about the fact of what like home ownership would mean to other people who like never had the security of where they might live or where they might be allowed to live. So I had to stop saying that. And also I bought, you know, a couple houses, you know, and then like got rid of them as soon as humanly possible. But now I'm actually a landlord to my daughter-in-law, and I've been landlord to some college students, and I hate it. It's so fraught. So it's so on my mind. Like now being the person, you know, that's on the other end of that. So I guess that's all to say that I think maybe you know, I gave a talk about this once, thinking about how it seems as though, I mean, I don't want to write like nonfiction, or I've been adverse to it because you don't want to, I'm not comfortable talking about myself or revealing much about myself. But then, you know, when I start talking about this book, I'm like, oh my God, everything about me is laid bare in the collection, you know, that you really do. I really am a writer at the end of the day who has drawn a lot on my life and my experiences to just get the seed of that, but that the emotion and what I'm investigating, you know, it ends up being more interesting because it's fiction. I guess that's what really fiction allows you to do, is just sort of just, you know, change, compress, you know, dramatize. But yeah, these are all my obsessions, basically, you know, relationships, family, where to live, how to be, where the world's going. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think to that, particularly to compression, of the many things I quote you as saying, the one I probably come back to the most as a writer and as someone who's done quite a bit of teaching and who spends a lot of time talking with other writers is what I call the Valerie Vogrin, Valerie Vogrin metric. Um, you said to me several times a decade or so ago that your characters should be as smart as they possibly can be. And it's something I think a lot about when I'm doing my own writing, and it's something I look for in other people's writing. And the way that I interpret it, actually, I think one of the better examples of it in this book for me is not only your narrators, but in the story that's now called Conversations with My Landlord and Booked, um, the young woman who loses part of her finger has a brief but pretty profound relationship to this mother, and particularly her daughter. And I think something gets tremendously elevated out of that that could be sort of passing or um, utilitarian culture of the apartment making or something. But I'm wondering if you could speak to the Valerie Vogrin metric and what you mean by making a character or giving a character the opportunity to be as smart as they can be.
Well, that's a, I mean, I know that it came out of teaching and out of being frustrated when, you know, people's characters just, I mean, like maybe they were almost like too realistic. Like the idea that fiction isn't like I mean, for me, I mean, isn't, it is made up, right? And so that, you know, that I often, I mean, and this isn't necessarily everyone, this is definitely my way of writing, you know, of finding a point of drama and then sort of exaggerating it a little bit, or, you know, bringing it so that it's so that it's bigger enough to feel like a story, but I don't know what I'm saying. So I think that the character thing about being as smart as they can be is sort of like the in the moment of experiencing life, you know, things aren't clear to us, or we often aren't sure about why we're doing things. And of course, the motives are never, I mean, we can't parse them out. But I feel like in telling a story, I guess that by telling the version of that story in which the character has the most access to understanding, then it calls it into higher relief the thing that they're not understanding, like, because clearly, so that so that there's not just like general confusion or general ignorance, but like that it seems more dramatic and inherently interesting to me if a character has so much going for them and they understand so many things, and then there's just this like one thing in the story that's sort of highlighted as not as simple as a blind spot, but as a thing that they've yet to sort of grasp about themselves or have been unwilling to grasp about themselves. And I don't know, but I do think finally that's an aesthetic. Like I consider myself to be a smart person who's also very ignorant, but a smart person. And I would prefer to read about people who are smart. I mean, not necessarily, like educate, like book learning smart, but who reflect on their experience and really are trying to, because that's part of what I mean by smart, right? Is and that's compression too, because what might take a character 10 years in real time to figure out about themselves or the relationships or whatever, maybe in a short story, you're cutting the ribbon of the story where they have a recognition or they learn something, and you've kind of compressed it. So that also makes them smarter because you put them close to that point, that turning point, as opposed to like showing them at the beginning when they were really, clueless.
Yeah, I think that one reason I think about that child in particular is that child isn't like Salinger's Teddy or something, right? Like the sort of hyper intelligent.
Which one are you talking about now?
Oh, the child in Conversations with My Landlord.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Isn't like over the top intelligent, or like isn't, you know, a surreal genius or something, but does give your main character an opportunity to see herself differently, to act differently, and maybe isn't the cause of, but like helps that character see her own weirdness as she does something like put her landlord's hand to the like damp wall while they're having sex to show him that.
Point about yeah.
But I think also in this particular story, the dotted line that we're going to look at the sort of last draft of shortly, that character has both a capability of assessing all the reasons that she is in the apartment and why she might not want to leave the apartment, and to think out that other individual, the landlord Jory's reasons for wanting her in the apartment, and to talk about that with a friend and assess that with a friend. And I think it adds a dimensionality that's real and complicated, and that makes that feel like life without spiraling out into every detail of the life, that I'm really excited about.
Well, you raise an interesting point, because I think when I was answering your question originally, I was thinking, primarily the protagonist, but you were actually kind of talking more about some of the like the secondary characters. And I think that, yeah, like that's super important too, because that in some ways that's the intelligence then of the story arises from different people's smart ideas kind of in opposition. And that if it's just a matter of like, if Jory was just needy and neurotic, that it wouldn't be very interesting if we didn't think that there was things that she understood or saw or recognized that maybe the narrator didn't, right? So yeah.
No, I'm really interested in the way you introduce Jory's painter boyfriend and her actually very caring attempts to encourage the protagonist to worry about whether or not she has a gene that predisposes her to breast cancer, and all those things that do mix things up. And it might be that she's getting a really good deal on her apartment, and it is a good space for her outside of her own thinking about whether or not that's the most comfortable space for her, which I think adds some stakes to that story. I'm grateful are
Thank you. It's a nice little story.
there. um,
We can agree on that.
Amen. So your book ends up taking place in this, I this happens to be in the St. Louis area, and you live and work in the St. Louis area. But the book not only won the Spokane Prize, which I forgot to mention, um, but from Willow Springs Press, but it also takes place in Green Bay. It takes place in Chicago. It takes place in various locales in Oregon. It takes place in Fort Greene and Brooklyn. Um, I'm wondering about location and how location ends up interacting for these characters for you, and how they're pressed across time and space, and what the significance of that is, especially I think for me, given that the very last story is someone who's, or two people who are caught very specifically in place because of a sort of post-apocalyptic situation.
Well, when you started talking, mentioning the places, I think that, well, without the exception of Green Bay, these are all places, that I have lived. And I think that it is interesting to think about. Oh, right, because even like the girlfriend, like isn't she a professor, not like University of Alabama, which is right where I went for my MFA. But I think it's interesting when I think about it that like often these places then, like for instance, so the conversations with my landlord that takes place in Brooklyn, it would have been in the Brooklyn more of the turn of the last, it would have been, like around 2000, 2001-ish or something. So it would have been quite a long time ago before gentrification had done its massive, thing of that area, which is just sort of like insane, and so it was a really special time. But I mean, like that gentrification is part of like the subtext of that story, right? And so, I mean, I am interested. So I feel like in many of the stories, there is like some then element of the setting, so that the sisters-in-law being in the Seattle area, and this idea of, people who have a vacation home, or people who go on vacation in the islands, in the, the San Juan Islands. And so, and like that's but a family vacation home, or and the things we'll need for the coming difficulties, where they live in a an earth home, but kind of like the man built that in sort of for environmental purposes, thinking this was a good thing, but also might become in handy down the line, sort of a thing. But yeah, I think I am interested. I guess it goes back to those ideas about how much of our stories are shaped then by those spaces, and by the things that, because those are things that we can't ultimately control. Like, I mean, once we've signed the lease, then we're there. And the things that we hear from the upstairs apartment, or the things that are repaired or aren't repaired, or going to new places that we have to find our way around. I don't know, that is really fascinating to me. I mean, I think, isn't that fascinating to everybody? I don't know. I really like in the next thing, a story with Chorus, one of my favorite, which is really dark, right, is that she gets this woman who, as you said in one of your emails to me, she's sort of on the run from a marriage that hasn't gone very well. And I can never remember the name of that word. What's the name of the word that describes a story like Don Quixote, when it's like episodic and it's,
Oh,
I can never remember it.
Yeah, it definitely starts with a P.
Anyway, if you think of it, you can burst in. But like, she ends up being on this series of sort of adventures, because she ends up, her car breaks down. She goes off with a guy that she had met at a convention, but then he has a problem to deal with, so she ends up with the guy's brother, and then the brother goes to help out this woman, and not a woman, it goes out to help out this friend because this guy has died, right? And there's nobody to get him out of the apartment. And so, but I love the description in that apartment. I mean, it just feels like, I don't know, like I do really love those moments. Like, there she is. I mean, she couldn't be more of an outsider, standing in this other person's space, trying to imagine what his life was like, while he's sitting there dead, and his poor brother is sort of tasked with getting him out of the apartment. I don't know. Does that make any sense at all?
No, I think it totally does. I think that story is remarkable and bizarre, and it does create all of these moments, I think in part by the intimacy of it, right? Like the issues around the ex-husband not knowing which Thai space is the place to go, and this sort of ability to be concise about someone you do know, or the chorus in that case knows, right? Get thee to the Humane Society.
Right.
You know, like there's and that kind of thing that also is displaced in someone else's intimate locations, both the man that she goes to like have a moment with and the dead man. And I do really love the oddity of that and the strangeness of that in the way in which you get to know someone through that total accident they would never permit.
Right.
They would edit for you in their own life.
Right. Exactly.
I can't stop thinking about that word. So in lieu of sitting here staring into space,
Right.
perhaps I'm glad we got to talk about the book more generally and how it's put together. That was one of my hopes, but I'm also hoping we can take a look at the final edition of The Dotted Line.
Sure.
Cool.
So one of the things I had mentioned to you that was a change as I was working through all of the stories in the collection, and that the editors at Willow Springs kind of helped me to see, was that I had made some stories like this that is a very straightforward story in some ways. I had still made it like unnecessarily like made it more difficult to read and to follow than it needed to be by not having like simple things like time markers, or taking advantage of the fact that there was built-in suspense because a lease is something that's assigned a dated document. You know, it needs to happen by a certain time. And so this is just a small addition here that I made, but I think it's the kind of thing that maybe there's only like 20 or so lines that are finally that are different from the original to this published version this time, but they kind of speak to like, okay, where are we in time, passing, and sort of amplifying, you know, I guess, yeah, that tension. So are you unhappy, Jory asked. Is there something you want to talk about? She tacked up a calendar at the foot of the stairs, thick black X's marking the passing of days. Just 7 blank squares left in the month. I'm fine, I said. You've been drinking more wine lately, have you not? You're keeping track? When you drink, your walk is heavier and you scuff. I scuff? I made my voice as stern as I could with a word ending in f. She blinked. She'd momentarily forgotten her mission. Do you want to paint your walls, I mean? I'll supply the paint, of course. I vowed to dispose of my empties elsewhere. I wondered which would be worse, if Joy really did know everything about me or if she didn't know one damn thing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I love the dialogue in this particular story. I think it speaks to a lot of the odd tension, but also to your phenomenal sense of humor, which I'm hoping people will get when they finally get down to reading the book. This particular book is available via Willow Springs Press. Picaresque. Is that
Picaresque? Thank you.
Sorry. A picaresque novel, which I'm going to attribute to our other editor, Matthew Schmidt, who's standing in the background writing the word out for me.
Thank you, Matt.
Anytime. But Valerie, where can folks find your work beyond Willow Springs Press?
Well, they can go to my website, valerievogrin.com, and there are links to all the stories of mine that appear online. And I do feature excerpts. And there's actually on my website, there's where you can download and get little make your own booklet kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
and everything. So yeah, which I think is fun. And yeah.
Amen. Cool. Well, ValerieVogrin.com. As always, folks can find us at which is the number 1, weedcritique.com. They can find the 2 versions of your story there. Thanks so much, Valerie Vogrin, for joining us today.
You're welcome. It was really fun. Good luck with everything.
Thanks.